My name is Rich Schmidt. We're here with Mike Willison. It's June 18th, 2025, and we're at Adelsheim Vineyard in Newberg. Mike, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
First question, let's get things started. Why wine?
Well, I think for a lot of people who do what we do, it's something you discover. I was fortunate enough to live and grow up in a place where I wasn't exactly feral, but I was given a lot of latitude in terms of what I wanted to do and what I wanted to be. And we, in my home, were kind of given freedom that extended beyond the age that we were supposed to be doing things. My parents were pretty loose with the idea that the drinking age was 21, but also with the understanding that you needed to be responsible for your actions. So we were allowed to taste things in the European way. We were granted permission to have an extra beer or two on a Friday night at home, those types of things. I think for me, fast forwarding quite a bit through many decades, the thing that initially drew me to it was how passionate the people that were passionate about it were. I was working at a very, very, very weird bar in the city of Chicago that was open exceedingly late. I only had to work 2 days a week, Sunday and Thursday, but I was there until 5:30 in the morning, and it was very much an industry hangout. So Sunday nights I would just get murdered at 2 when the rest of the bars in that city would close. So between 2 and 4, it was an overwhelming experience. The early hours were very empty, very dead, except for the odd sort of ex-pirate or person weirdly wrapped up as a mummy. I mean, it was just the most unusual crowd between 6 and 2. And I became friends with a guy who worked around the corner from where I lived, who was working at a fine dining adjacent restaurant that had just barely opened. We would sit there and complain about the service industry and do all the things that people in the service industry do together. And one night he came in a little bit more despondent than usual, and just was like, oh my God, I am supposed to go out of town this weekend, and it's Valentine's Day, and we're swamped at the restaurant, and I don't know what I'm gonna do. My parents or sister, I don't remember what the case was, is gonna kill me, and I don't know what I'm gonna do. And I was like, well, I don't know, I could pitch hit for you if you think I could pull it off. And he said, I don't know if you can or you can't, but I'm gonna throw it at the owner and just see what happens. I worked it was a Valentine's Day weekend, so Thursday, Friday, Saturday was all a hot mess, exactly what you'd expect, a complete overbooked disaster of high expectations. And they put me behind the bar with another person, thank God. And the expectation for me wasn't just to make drinks necessarily, but I had to go get all these bottles of wine that I knew virtually nothing about. I had had some experience with wine, but very, very limited to the things on the gun, right? The pink button was blush, the white button was Chablis, all things said in quotation marks, of course. And that first night, I fumbled through it like you wouldn't believe. But at the end, I get to taste all of the things that we poured by the glass. There were some other bottles that were open. And it sort of occurred to me, because it was 10:30, not 5:30 in the morning, but 10:30, and I had made more than I made at the bar that was open until 5:30, that this was maybe a more suitable and sustainable thing to be doing. Now, meanwhile, that was meant to be sort of my side hustle, but I basically ingratiated myself into this restaurant in a way that they couldn't let me leave. I worked that whole weekend. The next morning, after a Thursday night service, I hustled my butt as fast as I could to whatever the bookstore was at the time in that city. We used to have a place called Barbara's in Chicago that I think is long gone, and bought every wine book they had. The wrinkle about the place I was working at is that their wrinkle was they were only serving North American wine. So thank God for me, because I had only 7 or 8 chapters in the encyclopedia to have to learn very, very quickly. And so I did. I read most of a book, and I do not remember which one it was that day because I bought probably 7 or 8, and came back Friday night with a little bit more knowledge. Not much, but a little. And worked hard and did really well. Saturday night, same thing. Meanwhile, my buddy comes back and he's like, how'd it go? And I said, it was awful, everybody hates me, I'm terrible at this. And he was like, au contraire, everybody said you did great. And I said, well, I'd be willing to pitch in for shifts if you guys need anyone, if there's any space available. And that grew from the occasional spot shift to basically working there. And there are moments you have, this is a very long-winded explanation for how we're getting to the answer to your question, but there are moments that you have where you realize it's not just one thing, but it's many things. And for me, and now this is an unusual circumstance, and I don't think it's the same for everyone. This was the mid-90s, and wines were getting big, and they were getting, for lack of a better term, dumb. Where for people who didn't understand wine, it was really easy to get it all of a sudden because wines were big. They were barbecue sauce on the red side. They were, I don't know, Mountain Dew on the white side, right? Everything was huge. And it was easy to say, I get this wine. And I think I understood that. I basically committed myself to learning about one variety on the red side and knowing everything I could and then bouncing the rest of the wine list off of it. And then one thing on the white side. And I chose poorly. I chose Viognier, because and Zinfandel on the other side. Now both were having a bit of a heyday moment at the time and were not inappropriate with the cuisine that we were serving. Anyway, we were lucky enough to be on a tour stop for some of the founders of the Oregon wine industry. You probably know these stories about, Dick Erath and David Adelsheim and Harry Peterson Nedry and fill in the blanks of all these people driving around the country together, selling their wine in markets where they didn't have distribution or they wanted to be supportive in the days kind of adjacent to what are now known mostly as work with. Well, we were on that stop, and I was lucky enough to get to meet Dick Erath and David Adelsheim in the mid-90s with Harry Peterson Nedry. I believe, I might be misremembering the Harry part. He came in at some point, but for sure Dick and David. And they sat at our bar and poured me and 2 other servers and the owner of that place their wines. And it was the first time that I ever got it. And it totally made sense. And I never could let go of that moment. I remember those wines like I had them yesterday. I mean, it was truly something else. And their passion was obviously captivating and contagious. And so in the mid-90s, the amount of Oregon wine that was being distributed around the country was pretty small. It was limited to, say, 7 or 8 total wines. The things that you would imagine with some asterisks, like Amity was distributed nationwide, and a couple other things. So we were only able to get a handful of things here and there, so we began looking harder and trying to find more, seeing what rules we could sidestep in the state of Illinois to try and figure it out and get more of it. And eventually, those relationships became mine. And that passion became mine in a way that I think was the general gist, quite frankly, of what, distilling it down to just 2 of our founders, what David Lett and Chuck Corey believed anyway, which was we have to do something excellent in order to be noticed. There's a lot of people who say the very thing, right? Steve Martin is famous for saying, Do something so good that you cannot be ignored. And then the other thing that they said was, we have to do it together, because none of us can do this alone, especially at the size that we are. And that resonated for me hard. And I was an advocate from 2,150 miles away for many, many moons. And it just continued to sort of evolve out of that, much like I hate to be that derivative, but much like our industry has expanded, so did my love for it and my desire to want to become a part of it, which then sort of progressed down a very unusual path.
Pretty unusual start too. So we'll come back down to that path. Let's back up for a minute and talk about life before wine a little bit. You mentioned your semi-feral upbringing. Tell us about where you were born and raised and kind of your early life.
Yeah, sure. The Midwest. I was largely raised in the north suburbs of Chicago. And the north suburbs of Chicago are very much what you think about when you think about Ferris Bueller's Day Off or 16 Candles. My mom and dad eventually lived down the street from John Hughes. Like, this is not a joke. The high school I took my ACT at was where Sloan Peterson gets picked up and taken out of school, where Ed Rooney says, so that's how they do it in their family. I mean, that is what I ostensibly knew. So it was very traditional, middle class. Dad took the train to work. Mom didn't do anything and then sold real estate like Ferris Bueller's mom. And as a result, it was pretty typical Gen X, right? You know, I'd come home from school on the bus and nobody would be home, and we were just sort of given free rein in terms of our interests. And mine were varied. I liked and still like a wide variety of things. I loved visiting friends. I loved visiting places. I considered myself probably a lot funnier than I really was, like many kids. But I loved, oddly enough, school. I loved school. I loved grade school, I loved junior high, I loved junior high, middle school. I loved college. I loved college so much I went 3 different times. And really, I advocate for that type of education because it truly teaches you about yourself. The interactions you have as a child and as a middle schooler and as a high schooler and then moving to college, like, truly give you a sense of who you are. And the more people you get to meet, the better off you begin to understand yourself. And so, I mean, other than that, it was a lot of silly fun. Like I said, I was given a pretty long leash. I bought myself a car when I was 16. My parents would let me drive into the city and do stuff as long as I came home. And luckily I did. There was a lot to do as a teenager in Chicago between baseball games and the beach. And, you know, there were kids' goth juice bars that were super fun. And like the scene at the time in rock music in Chicago was awesome, with like Wax Trax Records and all these really super cool goings on. We had this killer music venue called the Metro, which still exists and has an Oregon connection. The first gig ever at Metro was put on by a guy named Joe Shanahan, who still runs Metro. REM was the band, and Jay Boberg is the one that set the gig up. And I was there, which is incredible because I worked for my high school radio station and they let us go to rock shows. We would just send a call. It was pretty weird. Anyhow, so stuff like that. As long as I made it home, and think about it, no cell phone, no tracker, no Life 360. As long as I made it home, my folks seemed to be okay with it. Now maybe they were up worried sick, maybe they were sitting at home drinking martinis, which is possible. And that's sort of translated into what I think is maybe my most important, one of 2 or 3 most important characteristics about myself, is that in manner of I think before I even knew this phrase, I've always been exceedingly curious, exceedingly, sometimes to a fault. Is that hot? Oh my God, yes. Is it still hot? Wow, it's totally still hot. And my parents instilled in me something that we've now all heard, which is the absence of judgment, right? I would rather find out and know more about something I know nothing about than judge it. And that has driven my life. Figure it out, find out more, learn. And there's something really to that, in my opinion. You know, we were encouraged, if you ask your mom and dad a question and they don't know, say, go to the library, it's just on the street. Library, it's a big building with books and now computers and stuff. Anyway, that to me is sort of it was feral but directed, if that makes sense. I think they knew what they were doing. My parents, that is.
So as you were heading into college, what were you thinking about for your future? What did you want to do? What did you hope to do?
I honestly had no idea. I thought maybe about doing something really interesting. I wanted to do like, what is it called? It's like forensic science, right? I wanted to do like all the shows that are on because I was pretty good at physics back in the day, and I thought, well, what would be a weird thing to do with physics? Maybe I could be like a super cop. That didn't really work for me. Physics is hard, as it turns out, once you get into college. I really just wanted to learn stuff. I took everything. I took a wide variety of classes, and I'll be honest with you, I crashed and burned my first 2 years. I really was just enjoying college and probably enjoyed it too much. I went to a school in Texas that was exceedingly repressed and was a total fish out of water. And if you know anything about the South, there are good people and there are bad people when you go to college. And what I mean by that is there are people who follow the rules and people who absolutely do not follow the rules. And I 100% aligned with the latter. Mostly they were kids of preachers, always the bad ones. In fact, one of my best friends to this day remains the son of a preacher and is a grown-up. But it really hampered my opportunities going forward because I knew that I was fooling around too much. So I ended up transferring to a school in the Chicago area that was way better for me. I came in as a junior. There's no mystique of the new guy. You know, you show up and everyone's got their head down just doing the work. And that really changed everything for me. But it also changed the need for me to actually get a real job, kind of. I had had that conversation with my father before I went to school that sort of wound up. One of the reasons I wound up at the school I wound up at is because when I started getting accepted to universities, my dad just watched the letters pile up, yeses and nos. And when we finally looked through the yeses, he was like, that's great. How are you going to pay for that? And so pretty quickly I realized the need to have some kind of job, and whether it was lifeguarding over the summer or working, waiting tables, whatever it was, I started doing that immediately. But once I came home, it was very clear to me that there would be a massive amount of debt piling up somewhere in my life, and it was going to come at me really fast. So I was lucky enough that I was able to work at a restaurant, just typical waiting tables, a sort of family dining place that is also still open. That taught me the real ins and outs of that industry tremendously. And I think maybe early on, this is really weird, and I only just thought of it now, this was a very big restaurant. We'd have 21, 22 servers on a night. And it was casual plus, maybe for lack of a better explanation. And we pooled tips. Always, 100% of the time. And that seems like a really small detail, but it meant that everybody had to help everybody all the time because the reputation of the restaurant was on the line. It wasn't just you in your section. The entire restaurant was always being judged by the overall service of the place. And I thought that was an exceedingly important piece of the puzzle, and certainly an allegory to the Oregon wine industry, where we all believe, I hope, that it's more important for us to succeed than me to succeed. Anyhow, that all led me down a very specific path, which was accelerated by my family's friendship with one of our neighbors who was the principal of our high school, someone I held in exceedingly high esteem, and still do, rest in peace, who was always encouraging me in very different ways. I think ways that were creative, but also ways that were maybe creative with a purpose. And he very much encouraged me during undergrad part 2, me to go down the path of teaching in high school. And he's like, look, who were your favorite teachers? And I told him who were my favorite teachers at our school. And he said, those are some of the best teachers we've ever had. Why don't you talk to Ted and bang, and see what they think? And as it turned out, they very much encouraged me. So that's what I ended up graduating with as an undergrad. I had a degree in secondary education with a focus on literature and English, and a very useful sub-minor in epistemology. Terribly useful. And ended up getting placed at the very same school, not where I went, but the sister school where Ferris Bueller's Day Off was filmed. I was placed there for my student teaching under a guy, his name was Van Dyke, and he was an amazing instructor, truly amazing. He taught me all kinds of wonderful things. My most important was that when a student would ask a question, he would make them ask it a different way every single time, unless it was just a detail. He added in that to almost every question he was asked, which I thought was pretty outstanding. That was interrupted by a very long chapter. Spring break, my first year, I realized that my side hustle was becoming my main hustle, which was this rock band that I had been in high school with some of my friends. We kept doing it over the summers just as a fun lark while we were in college. And then when they all graduated, 2 of them were a year older than me. Well, I guess everybody had graduated at that time. When everybody had graduated and I was student teaching, we kept playing, you know, at night, whatever, after people come home from work. And we made some demo tapes and did some of that stuff, and did something so unbelievably cavalier that it would never fly anymore. We sent demo tapes to every major record company in the United States with a note, a handwritten note that said, hey, saw these guys in New York last week, thought you'd like them. Jeff. No, nothing else. And lo and behold, a couple of people fell for this and came out and saw us. And anyway, that spring break, which I had off, we booked a trip to New York to go play at a music festival that I believe has changed names now, but it's become the CMJ Music Festival. And we had all kinds of pre-offers, crazy stuff. Guy Osiri, the guy that founded Maverick Records, offered to give us some dumb amount of money, $10,000, to not speak to anyone while we were in New York City, not speak to any other labels, which we turned down because we're stupid. And we absolutely stunk. We stunk at these shows. We were so bad. But we had played with like 3 other Chicago bands that all were great, and they all got signed. But I really enjoyed the trip. I thought it was super fun. I was a little bit despondent, and we kind of had to figure out if we were going to keep trying. Are we going to keep trying? This is insane. We just, absolutely laid an egg. We recorded another demo. It was better than the first one. We did this in pretty quick succession so I could figure myself out. Our demos had incredibly stupid names like Easy Lover, the Philip Bailey and Phil Collins song. We don't know what we were doing. And we somehow convinced all these labels again to come out to Chicago. And there were more bands that were going to get signed from Chicago. So there were 4 of us that were putting on what's called a showcase, where we just play our hits And the label execs come out and, smile and nod at each other and try and figure it out. It's like not much different than what we would expect at like a Major League Baseball tryout, except everyone's wearing a leather coat. And we had this unbelievably bad idea that each of the 4 bands would play one side of Neil Diamond's live album, Hot August Nights, because it was August. So we rehearsed our side, and nobody else did it. And again, everybody got signed but us. In fact, everybody was pissed at us. They were furious because these guys flew out from New York, LA, whatever, and we just thought it was hilarious. Needless to say, we are not in comedy. Somewhere, maybe about a year later, we made another demo tape and legitimately got someone to come out and see us and did sign us. And this is to a very big label called Polydor, which is based in the UK. In the US, it was A&M Records. And we, did what you're supposed to do. We went out to, where did we make that record? The first record we made all over the place. Made it in New York, Atlanta, and Vancouver, Canada, because we wanted to do all the cool things that everybody else had done. We wanted to record at Bearsville in New York because somebody had recorded there. We wanted to do our guitars at Triclops, I might be making that name up, at a studio in Atlanta where the Pumpkins did Gish guitars, and then we wanted to mix in British Columbia, which is where Bob Rock's guy lives, and we wanted to do all this cool stuff. Anyway, we did all that. As it turns out, we didn't sell that many records, but we sold enough for them to let us have another one. And went into it with a little bit more of a plan and got some cool stuff along the way. It was really fun. Like, I hate to make it sound like nothing ever happened. We got to see the world. I got to do all kinds of insane things. The guy that signed our band signed Duran Duran and was in Dexy's Midnight Runners and flew to London once to get me a Manchester United jersey signed by Teddy Sheringham on the Concorde. He just went back and forth with it and was like, "Oh, Mark, I've got you this jersey." I was like, what on earth is happening here? I got to meet Liv Tyler the year before The Lord of the Rings came out. I mean, like, boom, all of this cool stuff. But ultimately, it's about the job, right? It's like, are we going to be successful? I met Elton John on St. Patrick's Day. He was wearing all green. It was so cool. And that list can go on and on and on of like ridiculous things, but ultimately our band didn't do that great. So for you enthusiasts and completists, if you wanted to go look at like Empire Records, we're in the soundtrack. And there's some more, I can't remember what they're. But some neat stuff like that along the way. Keep in mind, I'm still a guy that has a job and wants to be curious, so I'm actually still working at restaurants during this time on the side when I'm home, because otherwise you just get bored. Also, I'm beginning to get worried about whether or not I'm going to have a job when this thing's over. I mean, I had a degree, but I didn't finish my student teaching. So I went, not exactly on the sly, slowly back to school, to grad school, to get an MED in teaching, and then I'd have to redo my student teaching again, which is awesome. But that more or less happened sort of after this first band disbanded, which was in around 1997 or 8, if I remember right. This interruption persists, however. My buddy Blake and I decided that we had one more record in us. He was half of that first band. We had one more record in us, so we, for the first time in my life, I borrowed money from my dad. I borrowed $10,000 from my dad. We went down to Nashville, slept in the studio, made a demo, and I'll be damned if we didn't get signed before we finished. It was actually amazing. We were airing out, because we were sleeping in the room that our record was being made in, we were airing out the studio in the morning, and we were playing back a song, and the guitar player from Weezer, whose name I cannot remember off the top of my head, walked by and said, "Would you play that back again?" And we were like, yeah. He goes, "Man, I love that. can you just give me a second? I'm gonna call someone." He picked up his cell phone, called the number, and said, "Here, listen to this," and held the phone up to the speaker. And it was Mick G, the guy that directed the Charlie's Angels film.
And the new Italian Job, if I remember correctly.
It was wild. So we had to finish a song, and then while that was happening, we got another movie. We got Gone in 60 Seconds as well, and had to do both of these before we had even finished, which was really, really wild. And I thought, we're gonna be huge. We are gonna be huge. I got Drew Barrymore over here, I got Nick Cage over here, I got Angelina Jolie over there, I got LL Cool J over here. We're gonna be huge. Meanwhile, it's 2020. We get signed to Island Def Jam, which has just been purchased by the largest company in the world, Universal Music, which is actually owned by Seagram's at the time. And Seagram's basically says, we have too many bands. We're terrified of Apple. iTunes was an unknown quantity, and obviously we're terrified of things like Napster and all of that. So,
You said 2020, you mean 2000?
sorry, 2000, thank you, yeah, 2000. That'd be cool if it was 2020. But yeah, it was the year 2000, so excuse me. And they said, unlike what we normally do, where we throw the spaghetti up on the wall in every single one of our genres and see what sticks, we're gonna run with known quantities this year. So I don't remember what the I don't remember what the country record was or anything like that, but our second band, a band called Caviar, fits somewhere in between rock and pop. Right in there, and that wasn't a category for them. So rock, they chose Sum 41 because Canadian content laws, and if you don't know about that, just look it up. And then over here, they chose Cisco because he was in Drew Hill. So we teed up this record with two box office winners and didn't get a video, A, or B, really get any support. Now, I don't care, because this was awesome. It was so much fun, I got to do so many things. But it was tough to see what looked like a layup not happen. And like here locally, actually Greg Glover, the DJ, the morning DJ on KNRK, tried to sign us when he was on, I'm blanking on the name of the record company he was on, but he had just gotten a huge signing, and so was given basically a blank checkbook, and we turned him down, and now we're still friends. And he still plays one of the songs in the morning, which is pretty cool. So like it's still out there doing stuff, which is really neat. We got very, very lucky. Unlucky in that, like becoming a Major League Baseball player, very few people get to. So I'm not like bummed about it or anything like that, but it definitely led me back to get my master's degree and finish that, which I did. Meanwhile, I'm still working at this restaurant that only carries North American wines. One of the guys at that restaurant, one of the lifers, had left and became the student placement director, I might have that wrong, at the Le Cordon Bleu in Chicago. And basically said to me, what are you gonna do when you grow up? For real. And I said, what do you mean? I'm trying to get my master's degree in teaching. He said, what are you gonna do with it? I said, probably go back and teach high school. And he said, you should do some observation first. Have you done that lately? Because it's been 9 years, 11 years since you did that the first time. Things are different. Good call. So I did, and I was like, wow, this is just enough different that I don't actually know what I'm talking about anymore. And that made things a little bit more clear to me. He said, well, once you're done with your master's degree, if you want to come think about teaching at Le Cordon Bleu, we could definitely use someone with your level of wine knowledge, because I never stopped studying, ever. I kept reading books and learning and tasting and knowing, and we'd get visitors from the Willamette Valley, we'd get visitors from Walla Walla. I began to know some of the key players here for sure, and whether it was seriously, people that I now know as friends, Sam Tannehill, Cheryl Francis, it was them. If it was Jimmy Brooks prior to his death, if it was Harry Peterson Nedry, if it was Patricia Green, like these people came to our restaurant. Steve Dorner, my God, Steve Dorner came into our restaurant often, which was cool. And they were infectious still. So this was always still in the back of my mind somehow, even though I was a lifelong Midwesterner. And so it was that eventually, after finishing my master's degree, I got a job at the Le Cordon Bleu teaching to start just like a sort of wine and spirits class. Eventually that was 100% handed to me, and because the Le Cordon Bleu was French, they had skipped Italy, which I found to be somewhat interesting, and I rewrote the curriculum for the entire organization, because that's what I had done. I had a master's degree in curriculum and instruction, rewrote the whole thing. I'm really, really proud to say that I have students from those days that are still doing this and have moved from cooking to selling or making or working in the wine industry in a lot of ways. Some very, very, very cool people are still out there doing this, which I think is awesome. In fact, I have several in Portland somehow that have made their way here, which I love. And right around then, I was lucky enough to get an invite to Oregon Pinot Camp. And that was it. That was it. It took another year before I figured it out. I came out here, totally had no clue what I was doing for Pinot Camp. Didn't know who invited me, didn't know why I was here, made every possible mistake you could, including leaving my car in the parking lot behind the Dundee Bistro, which at the time was where we held the opening tasting for Oregon Pinot Camp. I left it there because let's say I potentially had had one too many glasses of wine that night and didn't want to get arrested in Dundee. And in the morning, as my bus came from Newberg down to Evergreen Aviation, which is where we used to start camp, my car was parked in the middle of the farmer's market. So just a quick example of doing it wrong. It was also hotter than blazes that year, so there was opportunity. Anyway, in 2007, I called upon the founders of A to Z and asked if I could come out and work harvest. They had just purchased Rex Hill and had been making their wines sort of scattershot throughout the valley from here to there, hither and thither at pretty small levels, starting in 2002, just a couple thousand cases. And by 2007, it was maybe equal Rex Hill and A to Z. I don't recall exactly, but I came out for a few weeks, worked that very wet harvest, and went home and said, I think I'm going to move. I think I'm going to do this. Meanwhile, I have a job, and my mom and dad are there, and all sorts of things, and just didn't really make sense at the time. I really liked my job. I actually loved it. I thought it was tremendous to get to teach. I was still moonlighting at the restaurant every now and again. And then in 2008, I came out for harvest again. And maybe you do, maybe you don't remember, but that was a pretty great vintage. Really great, in fact. So everything was more or less perfect. And I stayed longer. I stayed and met 1 million people who also stayed. 5, 6, 7 people that were interns that year stayed from all over the place, from France, from California, from New Zealand, like all over the place. We're just a little tiny fraternity of people from that harvest who have stuck around for a long time. And that was enough. I packed up my bags, went home, packed up my bags, and made the drive out. Deb Hatcher and I were canoodling on a made-up position that sort of was a combination of things. I don't even recall what we landed on, but it was something somewhat absurd. I wasn't really working in the tasting room, but I sort of was helping. I was working with the trade. I was cooking. I was doing all kinds of stuff. So it was a very, very wild job, but it truly taught me the sort of ins and out of a very, very quickly growing brand. I've been fortunate enough that I just feel like I've been so lucky. I was lucky to work in the restaurant I worked at in high school. I was lucky to get all the things I got being at bands. I was lucky that my friend Ed walked in that night to the 4 o'clock bar and said, hey, you want to pitch hit for me? I was lucky that Deb and I hit it off so well that so many people from Oregon came in. I've been lucky that I worked for a company that went from almost minuscule amounts of wine to a fabulous amount of wine and a remarkable explosion of popularity and influence throughout not just Oregon, but the United States. I mean, the success model for that brand is truly based on, we can't do this alone, which I think is so important. And I've just been lucky enough to get to see this happen, to get to see it go from small to bigger to holy cow, and not just A to Z, of course, but us, the Willamette Valley, Oregon. I mean, during the time that I've been here, we went from 0.6 of the North American output of wine to over 2%. That doesn't sound like that much, but that's a hell of a lot of growth. And I think maybe more importantly, if you go into anywhere, doesn't matter what it is, maybe not an Italian restaurant, but go into any supermarket or any high-end restaurant, we represent well more than 2% of the North American output of wine. And I just feel so blessed and lucky that I've been able to be a part of some of that. So there's that. Wow, that was a long answer to a question, wasn't it? I don't even know what we're talking about anymore.
So much to cover there. I'm curious about, let's talk about your sort of own personal wine education.
Yeah.
Obviously, you came into it and you had to learn a lot quickly, and then to the point where you ended up teaching it. So tell me about your sort of process for learning wine. What did you find was most helpful for learning it, and what kept you wanting to learn more?
Well, it started 100% self-directed, right? Read, taste. I was lucky again that the person that ran that restaurant at the time, who is now also here in Oregon, was very free with education. Open the bottle, taste it. We have 15 wines by the glass, taste them all the time. Why wouldn't you? That's crazy not to. You want to talk about them? Great. When the winemakers and reps would come in, before I was in that position, he would you should join, watch, listen, we'll do tastings every day. We were lucky enough as well in that neighborhood in Chicago to have another great wine bar that's still open called Webster's. In fact, Jessica Answorth worked there for a long time, and we knew each other back in that day. And that was a place that we could go after work and learn more from them and their staff. We were lucky as well that Chicago was a hotbed for stuff, all kinds of stuff. We would have, the Beaujolais launch at a restaurant. We'd have the Domaine Romani Conti pre-tastings, that I would get an invite to, crazy stuff. And it was a very vibrant and emerging Chicago restaurant scene where people were understanding the value of not only the specific type of food that they were producing, but how wine worked. So that was it. It was curiosity, largely, right? I start by poking holes in a few things with a couple of books, read another book, finding my tone in terms of what books I like, understanding of variety, kind of hunting and pecking. Honestly, I didn't really have a lot of mentors until I started teaching. And those were basics, so I was very comfortable with that, and that expanded really, really quickly. This was trying to get my students to understand the value of wine to whatever they ended up doing in their lives. I was hopeful that some of them would want to, take that path, but it didn't always happen. We were also, at that time, one of the Court of Master Sommeliers, a guy named Serafin Alvarado, the first Puerto Rican Master Sommelier, was teaching an afternoon class for the wine trade at Le Cordon Bleu. And so I would stay, I would help, and I would learn from him a lot, a ton. And whether it was just about tasting or the world or geography, appellations, all of that mattered to me. It was less about chasing that pin, although I did do that for a while. It was less about that than it was about just feeding my overall curiosity. And I think very importantly to my journey and my discovery is that I operate, like so many people in this industry, with a very visual memory. So if I've been there, I got it. I can see it. And looking at maps, it takes me so far, and I love maps, but it only takes you so far. And it was so great to meet other people who were like, yeah, I totally get it. I get that. And then spitball wines off each other. I find that I don't have the same taste as a lot of people, and that's fine. Why would I? It's crazy. And then here, man, interacting with my friends, my people, I learn something every day. And if you don't, you're dumb. Honestly, like, I have to give a speech tonight to all of the bus counselors for Oregon Pinot Camp. And the guts of that message is, one, tell your campers to learn something from everyone. Don't focus on their heroes. Don't focus on the rock stars. You have no idea. There's 52 wineries here, and those are 52 really important wineries. Learn something from each and every one of them, and if you don't, you've just wasted your time. And then the second thing will be to talk about what I've talked about many times already today, which is that we are stronger than you. Don't be you today. Don't be you during Oregon Pinot Camp. In fact, don't be you in the market. Be us. We're better at this than you are. That's important. And somewhere, somehow in my life, that was distilled into me, and I think it applies for the reasons I've sort of laid out, for curiosity, for lack of judgment, but also our success depends on it. We got 273 people coming here in the next couple of days, all that work in this industry from all over the world. You want them to leave knowing you or us? So I don't know, I've just found that the community, winemakers, tasting room, retired, sales, losers like myself, all of us are out there trying to sort of accomplish the exact same goal. And whether it's a tasting group or just friends shooting it at the bar over a couple of beers, you're bound to find somebody that knows something that you don't.
So describe for me, outside of your perhaps shameful parking performance, describe for me your Pinot Camp experience and what it was. You already knew Oregon in a way. You'd met people, you were excited about the people in the wine. What was it about being here that was different?
Well, it's magical. I mean, for Oregon Pinot Camp is magical, but this place is magical. It's different than almost anywhere else on the planet. It's so cool. It's gorgeous. It's varied. It's 52 in the morning and 89 in the afternoon. That is not what it's like in the Midwest. If you haven't been there, it's 88 in the morning and 92 in the afternoon in the summer, and the humidity is 180%. I'd been to Oregon. In fact, we have a lot of family in this place. For some reason, my little chunk of our family decided not to come. For a point of reference, Galloway Street is one of my grandfathers of old. He's buried in the St. Paul Cemetery with a whole heap of my family, which is incredible that there were people here in the 1700s or 1800s, 1820, whatever it was. But when I got here, I truly didn't know what to expect. These were early days of Oregon Pinot Camp. And that camp hadn't even figured itself out yet entirely, despite everybody's best intentions. It still is and was then a work in progress. I was lucky that I had great bus counselors. I was lucky that I was not tired that first morning. I was lucky that I had friends here. I was lucky that after that first tasting, when I left my car in the parking lot, I walked over to Lumpy's with Veronique Drouin and did Jello shots. That is not the experience that most people have. There wasn't just me, there were others. And I remember that first morning, this is not, we don't do this anymore, but there's an auxiliary room at Evergreen. That's sort of I don't even know what to call it. It's a big room. It doesn't have big ceilings like anything else, but it's where we had our first lecture. And it was Harry Peterson Neddery talking about geology. And I don't know if you've ever heard Harry speak, but I'm sure you have. I would listen to him read the phone book. I mean, that guy, he's just got, butter for a voice. It's just gorgeous. And I was totally enwrapped. I was like, dang, I'd never heard any of this stuff before. And all the tastings were great. The people were awesome. I just was like, I had friends that happened to be from Chicago and other places that I was able to connect with. I was just blown away, and like every single thing I did was like experiencing it for the first time. And hearing everybody else talk about it, I don't remember if there were 270 campers that year, but everybody's excitement just all night, every day, and all the winemakers' enthusiasm and all the sales losers' enthusiasm, and getting to see all of it just blew me away. And it still does, it still blows me away. Every year I have to like take a step back and go, I can't believe we pulled this off again. And then you look around at the campers and the same thing is true. And every once in a while you catch one of us doing it. You catch one of us getting misty-eyed, like I'm sort of getting now. But I do, every year I get misty. And I think about it during harvest. I think about it when we do a Pinot in the city. I think about it when we can organize a road show together. Me and several other brands just did a little cross-Michigan road show together, and seeing everybody freak out. Our distributors freak out. They're like, you guys want to do this together? I don't understand. It's like, we're not fighting. So I think like a lot of things, Pinot Camp comes at you like a freight train, and you can only see the engine. And it's not until you are able to take a few steps back that you get to see all of the cars go by, and you realize, wow, I learned that. I met this person. I tasted how many wines? And I took notes, and I gave up after the third day or the second day. I just was like, I don't even know what's going on anymore. And the total impression that it leaves on you takes a long time to settle in. Really quite a long time. You get home and you go, wow, that was exhausting. I'm totally beat. But wow, that was gorgeous. And then you keep seeing it and feeling it over and over again. Hopefully you didn't get stung by a bee or something like that while you're here. But I think for the most part, we have the ability as a group to leave campers feeling that way. Mm-hmm. And if it translates into them moving here, like it did for me, which technically is a failure, if it translates into that, or if it translates into more influence in the market and going from 2 point whatever to 2.9% of the North American output of wine, and commensurate sales and placements, we'll take it. But mostly, I think the point that I really took away was we make the campers feel good. And that's how I felt. I felt good. Mm-hmm. I felt great. I was psyched to be doing my job. Mm-hmm. And that's not hard, that's not an easy trick, because most of us look down and go, I gotta go to work today. But I haven't done that in years, which is pretty cool.
Tell me about your first harvest experience.
I didn't know what I was doing at all. I had zero skills, none. I took the forklift exam in French because it was on DVD, and we had lost the English one, which was tough because I can say like 9 phrases in French. I truly was a fish out of water, apart from my enthusiasm, and that I had some advocates on those teams that were happy to see me, which was great. I felt a little bit like I was being taken care of in a special way, but they were probably trying to get me to not be run over by a forklift. It was somewhat miserable in 2007. It was a long wait. Everybody was waiting for the rain to stop. Now, that wasn't entirely true of everyone. People were pricking here and there, so we'd get fruit every now and again. But it was also a confusing time at that particular winery, since they had just purchased it, and there was a lot of crossover. That said, it remains one of my favorite vintages to drink. It's gorgeous. The wines are lovely. I left it feeling like my phone rang after the first course at, some killer restaurant, and I had to go. Because I wasn't here for the whole thing. I didn't see it to completion. I only had, I think, 3 weeks, if I remember right. I only had 3 weeks where I could take off school to be here for it. So it was abbreviated, and I left saying I'd like to do that from beginning to end, so I really know what I'm talking about, which I then did the next year.
And how did that year compare?
Well, 2008 was, from a vintage standpoint, was a fabulous vintage. The wines were all great. Everybody's wine was good, which meant that harvest was done slightly differently. in 2007, for the most part, there was a holy crap harvest where we're just sitting around waiting, and then everything came at the same time because this is what it is, it's got to go now. And then 2008 was quite a bit more relaxed, and I felt much more confident in what I was doing. I wasn't learning how to walk out a freaking hose, I wasn't learning how the right way it was to top barrels. I knew how to do these things now, so it was much smoother. And again, I had these friends that we made right away who were just lovely and just remain friends. And really, it became such a camaraderie there that that of course helped with how pleasant it was as well. We also did more things together as a group, and I was there for more of it. I'm just thinking off the top of my head of one that was amazing. Michael Davies has the big mustache, but back in the day he also had giant lamb chops. And like the hockey playoffs, it's fairly traditional to not shave during harvest. And so after 6 or so weeks, me and many of the guys had not shaved, and that didn't really add up to much for me. But for many of them it did. So one morning we all decided at the morning meeting that everyone was going to shave giant lamb chops out of whatever their beard was. And even the female interns put on glued on pieces of paper. And so we all just walked out and met Michael in the morning for this meeting, and he sat there for a minute and started speaking, and then looked around and kind of went, he got a little bit nervous and started cackling, and that was a great gag. One other very, very strong memory I have of that harvest was I was meant to be filling barrels for exceedingly intimidating and very tall and then super genius Mike Halleck from Carabella, and there weren't enough pumps at the time, so I was just waiting for a pump, and I had let's call it 14 barrels empty of Carabella Chardonnay that we were making for him, I guess, ostensibly at the time. And I was nervous because I'd never met him before, but they said, oh, he's very smart and super intimidating and very tall and maybe not funny, I'm not sure. But he walked in, and I'm just sitting there on one of the barrels, and he's like, what's going on? I don't have a pump. And he just turned around and left. Didn't say a word to me, and I was like, okay, Mike Halleck hates me. This is my reality. And then, of course, 5 seconds later, the pump shows up, and I was like, somebody's going to have to call him and make him come back. And Carabella's up at the top of Parent Mountain. It's not going to be me. But it was the one that it's really sunk its teeth in. We had more time. We had a day off, right? I had a day off, so I could go do a thing and look around. And, you'd go to whatever, down to Mac, and go into a restaurant. There would be other interns, right, that had their day off, and they're just like, intern? Yeah, you can tell because their hands are purple too, right? And their fingernails are all destroyed. And I just really, it just all sort of sunk in. I guess it's that moment at the end of one of my John Hughes movies, right? At the end of these movies where you realize that the guy or the girl that you've been chasing is wrong, and it's been you the whole time, right? And that's kind of what it is. I felt like I was not necessarily rudderless, but I'd done so many little things that hadn't amounted to strictly exactly what I wanted to do, and I was like, I think I just did it. And of course I was 30-something at the time already. I was 37, so that's tough. It's tough to get that late of a start too. I mean, keep in mind that the years I spent toiling in rock bands, those were years I was watching my best friends in the world all have very successful careers and jobs and marriages and divorces and sometimes many kids or none or whatever, but you were definitely on pause for that unless you become, Bono or Chapel Roan, and that wasn't exactly the trajectory we were on. So to figure it out at 37 years old was pretty cool, except I was still paying student loans, and a lot of them.
So once you figured it out, and once you found yourself in Oregon full time, tell me about you mentioned kind of finding a role at Rexo and having a role created for you. Tell me about your time there and how your role kind of evolved there.
Well, while we've been having this discussion, I realized that I remember the name of that job. It was public relations, a job I've never held, education and events manager. It was shortened to PREEM. The public relations part I figured I could figure out. Events, I wasn't sure what they were after. Education, I could handle. So I was teaching classes there. I was helping educate consumers. And then, I don't recall what year it was, but when Rex Hill and A to Z got their own dedicated national sales team, what they had chosen to do was aspirationally look for people that could take them to the next level. Many of those people still working in the wine industry today were really good at volume, but didn't understand organ. So it eventually became my job to teach them what to do. I had helped with club events and tried to make things a little bit more interesting, but we had a lot of inputs there, a lot of very clever and creative people working at Rex Hill and A to Z with me who we just came up with really fun, spontaneous things to do that were, these days don't seem all that interesting, but were a little different back then. But mainly my job evolved into this trade relations and national sales team education developer. So we'd bring the team in from wherever they lived, and really it wasn't about moving units, right, or cogs or anything like that. It was about learning here. Because wherever they had worked for before never did that. They just said, here's the numbers, this is what you gotta hit, whatever. And obviously that works if you're a giant company, but it doesn't work if you're a small company trying to become medium. And that was really cool. It involved a lot of very interesting things. Because I had the culinary school background, I would cook for people when we'd have VIPs, we'd do it all there. Like, I remember making Harvey from the Wine Spectator go pick his own strawberries for his dessert. Dude liked freaking overdone salmon, and I was like, I'm not doing that. Just not gonna do it. His wife made him eat it. It was awesome. Just, you know, it was super crazy fun stuff like that. I get to go to markets with these people and try and like talk to the distributors about it. And, you know, they'd nudge me when they needed an assist. Like, okay, talk about the stuff, not just the numbers, right? And so that's kind of always been what I did. It eventually things got complicated. This isn't a negative, but me and Carrie Kalsher kind of had the same, our jobs sort of almost became the same job, and something needed to change, and I wasn't really sure what it was gonna be yet. So I asked Deb if she would be upset with me if I left. And she said, what do you wanna do? And I said, I don't really know. But I just wanted you to know that I might look, just because I feel like the two of us together are gonna, at some point, it's not gonna work. We're gonna be working at cross purposes, or you don't need two people to do what I think we're both gonna end up doing. And like pretty quickly thereafter, Derek at Patent Valley called and asked if I wanted to work over there, and I thought that would be a really interesting switch. As I had worked so tightly with our national sales team, I thought this could be really fun. This could be really interesting. And the size of the team meant that there were only 4 or 5 of us, and so every job was all the jobs. And as a sort of joke, they made me director of sales. I didn't have a team, I wasn't directing anyone, but I was certainly the only one there, so I could have been anything I wanted in terms of sales. And that was that ended up being about 5 years total, and really an incredibly rich experience. Again, I'm so lucky. I learned a lot about a lot of things. Working at A to Z, a lot of things. Many of which are things that we're still trying to get over the hump on as an industry. But A to Z still continues to be out there just holding the flag without a weapon, which I find to be maybe one of the most compelling things about any company. We made Patent Valley a B corporation which nobody thought anybody that small could do. Winderly's done it as well. There's been other, AFI have now done it. We've did all kinds of interesting things there, expanded our footprint to all kinds of markets. But ultimately, it was very much just about a handful of us. It was really a 3, 4, 5 person team when it all came down to it. And like so many things, 2020 presented a million challenges and opportunities for us. That place really, really got kicked in 2020. We'd had the property to the west of us had decided to make burn piles during harvest in 2019, so we lost half of that vintage to smoke damage. In 2020, our winemaker had moved to Victoria, BC, and so when it became time to do the work, COVID, and so he couldn't go back and forth because he's a US citizen, so if he came back to the US, he would have had to stay, leaving his wife and kids behind. Our interns were all coming from Europe, so they didn't. And as it turned out, me, Monty, and Justina ostensibly did the whole harvest and the whole vineyard and the whole everything. We had help from the Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue teams who would come out on their days off and help us do bud rubbing and all kinds of ridiculous work. We broke every farm implement you can imagine. We broke everything in the cellar. It was really, really hard work, but it was ultimately like one of these things that you take a ton of pride in. After that, Monty and Dave, the two primary owners of Patten Valley, couldn't agree on how best to refinance the business. Monty had wanted to move out of the house adjacent to Patten Valley for a long time, and they ended up selling the property, which more or less left me without a job. That said, and this is an important piece of that puzzle, because we had inventory, the owners of Patten Valley said, you can stay as long as you want. Just keep trying to sell inventory. Just do what you can, and when you need to go, you can go, but we're not gonna drop you. We're not letting you go. We're not furloughing you or whatever. We're gonna look for a buyer, and we're not going to leave you out in the lurch. It was truly like one of the most generous things that I've ever heard in my life. And then, bit of a happy ending, Justina and Derek, who were winemaker and direct sales, bought the remaining inventory and continue to operate not Patten Valley Vineyard, but Patten Valley Winery to this day, just recently moving their tasting room to Forest Grove, literally like 2 weeks ago. So it's pretty exciting. Derek's making the wines at Wines by Joe/Dobbs, and they're using purchased fruit, obviously, because Patten Valley is no longer Patten Valley, it's Fela. So that gets us to 2020.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
What happened then?
Well, I did look for a job, and unfortunately, nobody was hiring anyone because it was 2020. I mean, what the hell are you going to do? It took me until August of 2021 to find another job, which is fine because from whenever the sale was, and I don't recall when it was, but whenever that was until then, all I was doing, like everybody else, was sitting around my house in my underwear, drinking Manhattans at 11 o'clock in the afternoon, because what the hell else were you gonna do, right? You went from like, I might wear sweats today, to just literally wearing a bathrobe, and that's it. Ordering your groceries, online, and hoping that nobody stands around and waits for you to sign anything, because you're in your underwear. Somewhat of a full circle moment. One of the national sales people from A to Z's husband was the wine director, was the vice president of sales at a medium plus size winery in Mendocino. And I thought, if anybody's like Oregon, it's probably Mendo, right? And this is the largest organic winery in California. Aspirationally regenerative organic, in fact, probably regenerative organic now. All of the things were ticking the boxes for me. That was like, cool. And I liked this guy, Brian, quite a bit. And I just said, maybe this is gonna work. I applied, they were like, you live in Oregon. That's kind of weird for, California, and you're gonna have the West Coast. And I was like, yeah, that's where I live. I'm not moving to Ukiah. Somehow I got hired. And these are great people. The wines were better than they needed to be. but boy, did I hate being in the California wine industry. People, it is not the same. Even in the Anderson Valley, even in Mendocino, it is dog eat dog, stab you in the face, drive over your front lawn. It was not what I signed up for. And I was making the best of it because I was like, what else am I going to do? I'm a 50-year-old white guy. You know, for lack of, I hate to say that, but like, it's hard to get a job at an age because A, they think you are going to ask too much money, and B, it's, who wants that as your poster boy? So I was getting a little bit depressed. And during that time here at Adelsheim, things were changing as well. There was a sort of regime change. Rob Ahlstrom was brought in as the president and CEO, and I don't remember what his job is now, but it's something like that. Rob knew me from A to Z, where he had run their sales team for a while when he had his Northwest Court collection. One of the members of that team, John Kimball, had been brought on here to run wholesale. And unbeknownst to me, they were looking for somebody else. Meanwhile, I'm somewhere in California sitting in my hotel room crying myself to death. And my wife says, did you see that Adelsheim is hiring? And I was like, no. Why? You think I'm going to be looking at a job, description? Anyway, I texted Rob after reading the job description and just said, hey, what are you looking for? Like, what is this job? What do you want? Do you want a kid? Do you want, what are you after? Got the old ellipsis for a little while. And then he just wrote back, you. And I was like, holy crap. He goes, you will have to send in, like a resume or something and probably an application. And he said, I'm going to have you call. This is all happening in front of me in a hotel room in Santa Rosa, right? I'm just sitting there in my underwear. And he's like, you'll need to call John and do just a quick, Zoomer or whatever. But we'll pull the job posting. And I was like, oh my God, okay, wow, what? So I found a picture of the menu from Meritage in Chicago and screen grabbed it to say 1993 Yamhill County Cuvée Adelsheim, $8.38 or whatever it was on the bottle list. So buy the glass and that, and just put that on it with my address up top, and then I signed it on the bottom. And that was my resume. It might have also been my cover letter. I don't remember, but it was truly one of those wonderful moments where I really felt like the decision I made in 2007 was correct. Mm-hmm. You're going to bounce around. You're going to find yourself again. You're going to run up against the wall. You're going to trip over something. You're going to make a jackass out of yourself, which I'm sure I'm doing as we speak. But I couldn't believe that the wine that made me understand wine was where I was going to get to work. Mm-hmm. Like 100% doesn't make any sense at all. I mean, without leaning too heavily back into the Major League Baseball thing, it's like that kid who shows up at the game and then ends up playing for that team. I mean, it's just bonkers to me. And that I'm here in 2025 with Gina Hennon at the controls. I mean, honestly, she's ridiculous. She's a sorceress. She makes wines that don't make any sense. They're so good, and it's exactly what Adelsheim was always supposed to be. Like everybody else, we're going to run into stuff, but this is the best Adelsheim's ever been. And maybe it took 50 plus years to figure it out, but maybe it just took hiring her. I mean, she's been here forever, and she is truly the heartbeat of this place, and I get to be the one that sells her wines. It's really meaningful to me. It's really great to be able to tell the stories, the history, the legacy, but then remind people that 2025 isn't 1971 anymore. This industry has changed so much, and honestly, in 1965, now 60 years ago, since David Lett and Chuck Corey started planting grapes and thinking about making wine, to think that there would be a Gina Hennon in this industry is almost mind-boggling. And that there are so many doing similar things like Gina in so many wineries here, it blows me away. But I kind of have to jiggle myself every once in a while. I'm like, oh my God, you work for David Adelsheim. I was looking through Instagram the other day. I don't know why, I never do that. And I'm also a terrible social media user. And I clicked back and I was just looking, I might have been looking for something specific, but I clicked back to 2018 and I was at Provine in Germany with Oregon, right? The Oregon Wine Board, and we all go there and we chit chat. We go to London, Provine, and then Copenhagen. And I found first a picture of me and David standing next to a cardboard cutout of a picture of David, which was pretty awesome. And I just cackled at that because, I mean, of course you were gonna stand next to David, right? This is who you're gonna stand next to. And then the next page, or the next photo, was like one of those like totally dumb, why am I taking this pictures? But it was a cooler, like a wine fridge, totally empty with a Post-it note on it, ripped in half, and it just said Adelsheim Chardonnay. It was David's handwriting. He must have just been reminding himself that that's where he was keeping his Chardonnays during this event. And my caption was something like, somebody drank one of the greats' great wines, or something like that. And so that's long before I had a job here, or even thought about it. But it's just one of those things that I look around and I look around at the team and the people that I get to work with and the place that I am and the legacy that is being dragged behind us. And I not only feel lucky, but I now feel, as I sort of have for a long time, a tremendous amount of responsibility in a way that I felt before with many things in my life, but nothing like this. This isn't just, well, it certainly isn't me. This isn't me. This is the global us. And it's preserving not just the legacy, but also really highlighting and celebrating what's to come. And I think, weirdly enough, the future for Adelsheim is really good. We have made all kinds of wonderful decisions in the last 3-4 years since I've been here that are pointing us in a direction that we haven't sailed in before. And it's all really cool, like super cool. And it's exciting, and it's weird to be excited about a 54-and-a-half-year-old brand. It just is, unless you're a 500-year-old brand. We're in a weird spot. I'm a 54-year-old guy. It's hard to get excited about a 54-year-old guy. It just is. We're just there. We're maybe dad-bodding. We don't know what we're doing anymore. But the reality is we're kind of in a blah phase. And you have to figure out how to turn that frown upside down, man, because if you don't, you just fade into obscurity. And that's not what this brand should be doing. We're not holding that flag out on our own without the weapon, but we're maybe playing the drum right next to that guy. We're maybe rat-tat-tatting on the drum in an effort to draw some attention and make sure that you're looking our way and not 1,000 miles south. No disrespect meant to our brothers and sisters in Baja, Oregon. But we need it. We need your help. And I just heard something really remarkable. Adam Campbell from Elk Cove is one of my favorite people in the world. He's so level and positive and just has such a wonderful outlook on everything. We were in Chicago together doing an event for our distributor in that place. And obviously, there's a lot of economic uncertainty always, but especially right now in the wine industry, which is seeing some dips. And somebody asked him, he was on a panel, somebody asked him, what do you think about, what do you do when stuff like this happens? You're gonna, how does your brand react? And he says, by telling you to bet on us, bet on small, bet on Oregon, bet on little guys. Bet on people whose family are involved. Bet on people who are in it for something other than what you think they're in it for. These are people whose lives are on the line, not just the profit of their shareholders. And there's anything particularly wrong with that. It's just not who we are. And if you want to succeed in a market where things are looking blue, you bet on the people who care the most. And I was truly touched by that. This was maybe 3 months ago, completely and truly touched. And I remember that stuff when I'm feeling poopy, right? In the immortal words of Jamie Tart. I remember that stuff when I'm feeling down. It's like, no. This is what we did, and this is what we have to continue to do.
So you mentioned, obviously, your initial impressions of Oregon. You mentioned where Oregon is now. Tell me about the growth and evolution you've seen here. What is different about Oregon now than when you started, and what is the same?
Well, it's an extension of so many things. Obviously, there's a lot more wineries. There's a lot more people. There's a lot more wine. But with that came experience and education and know-how. We wouldn't be making wonderful Chardonnays in Oregon if 2010 hadn't happened. And now they're awesome. Or if Dominique Lafon had never shown up here. Those things only happened because we became popular. We became interesting. That is a huge piece of the puzzle. Further, the institutions that were put in place by us are now operating at a level that is far beyond the capacity that they were operating at even 10 years ago, 15 years ago, which is more than that, 20 years ago when I got here. Think about Linfield, think about Chemeketa, think about Oregon State. All of these places barely existed in terms of wine studies or wine education or agricultural concerns. The nursery at OSU is a totally different ballgame than it was. The research being done there is a totally different ballgame. Out there in the vineyards, we have access to way more stuff, right? Whether that stuff is cuttings, whether it's the actual fruit material, the plant material itself, the knowledge. I remember like new tractors every year. How many more new tractors do we need? Well, a lot, as it turns out. And we have robot tractors now, which is crazy to think about. Nicholas J is using a robot, which is so cool. Our understanding of our own soil has become that much more acute and also obtuse. It's so broad, but also so specific to a place now. That was very much in development back in the day. Our understanding of what this climate can be, our flexibility in terms of what grapes we're growing and how we're producing them and why. From a restaurant standpoint, and I apologize, but this is so much of my life. You've all been to a restaurant when it's totally dead at 6:30 and at 7 o'clock, it fills up and everybody's losing their mind and your server forgets your appetizer. Well, that's what happened here for a long time. We'd wait, and then we'd fill the restaurant at 7. Now we're making sparkling wine, so we're picking at 5:30, and we get a whole turn at 5:30, and then somebody comes in just for a little happy hour, and we get to deal with them for something like rosé or Pinot Blanc or whatever, and then we're picking Chardonnay because now we have the right plant material in the ground, and it doesn't ripen at the same time as Pinot, and then we get to do Pinot Noir. That's insane. It seems like we should have thought of this a long time ago, but we didn't because things weren't getting right. I bet that's a huge piece of the puzzle. The fact that more and more wineries and vineyards have made the decision to take care of everybody, to make their employees key, rather than just like profit. Now, this is a very B corporation of me to be talking about, but we think about it now. We're providing more winery housing for those that are working and tending to our vineyards. We're thinking about it for our interns. Not like, I'm just gonna live in McMinnville somewhere. We're moving to a place where I dare say we've actually almost become an industry. Because prior to that, we weren't. I mean, we were very much still borrowing everything, whether it was from France or California or Washington, wherever, and now we're becoming slightly more self-sustained. And with that, I think comes that, again, that curiosity of how can we make things better? What can we do? I met a guy, oh man, it's years ago now. I met a guy who was talking about the threat of the glassy-winged sharpshooter or Pierce's disease or one of those leafhopper bad boys. And he was just so confident. He said, no, just plant. Oh no, it was spotted-winged Drosophila, the fruit fly that will lay its eggs in ripe berries, not spent berries. That's a problem, right? Because on black-skinned grape varieties, you can't see eggs inside. On green or yellow, you can. Anyway, he was like, no. Just plant buckwheat as a cover crop. It'll reseed itself 2-3 times. It'll help fix nitrogen levels, and it attracts the natural predator of spotted-winged Drosophila. Now look what you've done. You've added a wonderful input into the soil, and you've sprayed nothing. Like those, that's almost folksy, but it's actually totally true. And I love that. And it's this idea that now, not only will I share it with anybody watching this, but that's something that pretty much everybody here knows. And it's often a piece of people's cover crop. And guess what? We don't have spotted-winged Drosophila. So we're lucky again. We're learning from our friends in California and Washington who tend to have these problems first, but not always. I hope that we will continue as an industry to keep buoying ourselves. I hope that we never lose that spirit of we are stronger than you are. We together are much stronger than any specific brand. We're luckily in this place that we've had brands doing what they do. And whether it's Domain Serene, bringing the people with all of the money, which is absolutely wonderful, whether it's Ken Wright's contributions on geology, whether it's Rex Hill's contribution on single vineyards from back in the day, whether it's Patricia Green for being an outspoken voice for women to be in charge, whether it's Cheryl Francis for doing something the same. There are so many things that we need to continue to do that we need to say, I need your help with, right? We need Linfield's help to keep spreading the word. We need Chemeketa's help to keep making people great winemakers. We need OSU to keep giving us information, to keep teaching us how better to make wine. When we made wine for the first time in the 60s and 70s here, we had to write a book. And we didn't know what we were doing. And I think if you're honest with yourself, you never do. Because this thing changes every single year. Every growing season is different. We have to keep being curious. And we also have to keep being confident that we are the most important thing in Oregon, not you. And the sooner everybody remembers that and recognizes it, the better off we'll all be together. And that's why what you guys are doing is so important, because you're preserving the message in the hopes that I think someone will look back and go, great, we're still doing that. And if we're not, they'll go, we should think about that. Maybe. I hope we collectively still remember what I think and hope the goal is, which isn't just to be big, to be huge, to make $1 billion and drive a Lambo. It's to try and make these two really hard things. And I realize that there are many more grapes in Oregon than Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. But try and make these two exceedingly hard things to make, because they're so transparent, as close as we can to perfect. It's so hard. Because every little thing you do in the vineyard, in the cellar, when bottling, all of these things are exponentially magnified after fermentation. And they're so obvious, right? It's like, what did we do here? Or, yeah, that's been manipulated, or whatever it is. I remember, I don't know what year it was, but it was also hot. And I was listening to Gary Andrus, who was an exceedingly hot-headed, crazy, passionate person that I was too scared to ever talk to. He said something so deeply profound. Somebody asked him, why did he do this? Why are you here? You very successful, Pine Ridge, big deal. You make a lot of wine, it's great. Your bottlings are expensive. You have to have, he had a plane, he had a helicopter, he had all the things, like all the things that you think about when you think about success. Why are you here? Why are you in Oregon? And he said, because I can continue making B- wines for the rest of my life and be really, really happy. But what I want to do is make a perfect one. And I can't do that down there. I can only do it here. He's like, maybe I'll hit one of these days. I haven't yet. And he's got a point. These are hard. Pinot Noir is annoying. It's really hard to grow. Chardonnay is annoying. It's hard to make it perfect. The little things, right? How much mallow, how much new oak, how much old oak? Is there stainless? Is it on the leaves? Is it not? All of that is shouting at you when you taste a Chardonnay immediately. And I'd argue as well, it's shouting at you as a Pinot. It's a little bit different just because scanning stuff. But I hope that we continue aiming for that star and not resting on our laurels ever, because it's different every year. You get to try over again.
What about you as you look ahead for your future? What have you not done yet that you want to do? What is next for you?
I don't want to get another job. I don't want to do that anymore. I'm really happy where I am, and I hope that we continue to have the kind of success that allows me to stay here. I want to continue to be an ambassador for this place, and not necessarily just Adelsheim, but this place for Oregon. I want to be a voice that people believe is telling them the truth, and is so passionately involved in this thing that if I got removed, I'd probably die. Because quite honestly, that's how I felt when I was out of it for 9 months. I don't think I want to have that phantom limb gone, right? It's not just my job anymore, it's this, and that's so important. So I don't know, I would just like to fade off into the sunset one day and have people go, golf clap, probably, and every once in a while speak fondly of me when I'm not in the room, but more importantly, remember that I cared about this.
Last question for you. I know that music was a big part of your life early on. You got back together last year. We re-released an old album. Tell me about that.
We did. It's like an octopus. It just keeps coming and grabbing you. So many legs. We've had a great advocate, an entertainment lawyer in Chicago who's been itching to re-release some of our material. And that is hard. There's a lot of legal wrangling that goes on. There's publishing contracts, there's record deals, there's all kinds of stuff. And then there was a great big fire in Los Angeles, not this one last year, but that burned down the storage facility that kept a lot of masters. And Universal Music Group said that ours were in there. They also said that we're not allowed to do anything with them, which is really weird. So this guy has just been scratching them and bugging them for so long that last year they said, we'll give you the rights to any unreleased material and you can put it out on vinyl and digital. And he said, okay, what about the two records that did come out? And he said, they were like, we'll see. Anyway, so he did it. He put out some demos and some B-sides and some things, and then we played a couple of shows to support that in Chicago. And they were fun. They were super fun. I mean, we're all old, and it hurts to play and stay up late and do all those things. But it was a total blast, and there was a lot of enthusiasm and excitement about it. We sold enough to make it worth making more. And he, of course, now is even more excited about it. And Universal Music Group Special Projects has released both of our A&M records to him. So we'll repress the first one, which has another stupid name. That's What Love Songs Often Do. We're going to put that out this July, and then we're going to put the second one out next July. This July, soon, and I need to start rehearsing, we have not, and I have not really, we have several shows coming up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and a bunch in Chicago. And just to put that fun bow on it, we're repeating a tour with one of our favorite bands from that era. We played a lot with Letters to Cleo, and we're doing all of those shows with Letters to Cleo, which will be so fun because we've remained great friends with them. And that'll just be, I don't know, it'll probably be a really delightful homecoming. No plans to do anything else with that. I mean, it could be that we do more shows the following year, but I don't know. It could be that we all, collapse from exhaustion after these 4 days in a row. We'll see what happens. It's fun. It's a blast. If I'm honest, I loved going places more than I liked the show. Like playing is fun, and I like making music, but I like just being in places. I like going to places that have something to share, and that's very much exactly what I do now. I get to go places, and I get to share something I'm really proud of with people, and it continues to scratch that wonderful itch for me of getting to walk down a street in a town I've never been to and find something unique, find something new, find something I've never seen before. And then to be able to answer the question, why are you in wherever? I work in the Oregon wine industry. And you'd be surprised, it's about 99%. Oh, cool. Cool. Yeah.
Fantastic. All the questions I have for you today, anything I didn't ask that I should have, anything we didn't cover?
God, I hope not.
Need to be covered.
I hope not.
It's pretty thorough.
I tried.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
For taking the time, sharing your story with us. We really appreciate it.
Is it like 4:30 right now? I mean, where?
It's quitting time.
I see Michael just standing out there waiting.
Speech is right around the corner now. Your PC speech. Thank you so much. We'll let you off the hook.